Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt Television and Radio. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers, and we are going to discuss the national politics of the day. Biggest news is that the COVID bill finally did pass, almost strictly partisan. Down the line, one Democrat, guy from Maine, I'm forgetting the name, voted against it. There had been two votes against it when it was in the House before. Apparently, one person was satisfied with the changes to the bill that the likes of Manchin and Sinema kind of pushed. Reduction from $400 to $300 a week for the unemployment enhancement, reduction in the income of the people who will receive the $1,400 checks that complete out the $600 from a few months ago when there was a push for 2,000. And a few other things that didn't have. Oh, the wage increase right now is not going to be passed, partly due to a parliamentarian decision that it was, or opinion that it cannot be used cannot be passed through reconciliation, but also because there were people lining up against it. Total of 7 Democrats, I believe, voted against it. But the COVID bill did pass. It's $1.9 trillion, bigger, more than twice as big as the one that was passed in 2009, and bigger than the two that were passed under Trump. All of a sudden, Republicans are fiscal conservatives again after 4 years. So they said the price is too high, not properly targeted. We don't need to support museums. If they go under, they go under. That kind of a thing. So, Chuck, what do you want to say about it?
Well, the thing that strikes me about this bill, first of all, the critical need, obviously, in unusual circumstances like we still are in at this point with COVID-19 and the recovery and the economy and so on. But the other thing about it is, depending upon which poll you look at over the last month or so, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the American public favors this stimulus bill. Yet you see Republicans, as you said, pretty much just voting in lockstep against it since there is a Democratic administration pushing it. Yet, when you consider 60 to 70% of the American public, a lot of Republicans are telling pollsters, at least, that they want this and they need it, yet the Republicans in Congress are voting against it. And I don't understand the political calculation there, except to say that it just continues the us versus them polarization that exists in Congress right now. This, it seems to me, would have been a terrific example or a terrific opportunity for Republicans and Democrats to come together on something and show some bipartisanship. But that didn't happen, even though clearly a lot of Republican constituents support this and want those checks and want the stimulus bill to pass, as it did.
Well, and there's a bit of history here, because one of the things Chuck Schumer said today is we're not going to make the same mistakes we made in 2009, trying so hard to get Republicans to sign off, that we were compromising on the bill the whole time, and we ended up with an inadequate stimulus bill. And this is not just one of the Republican criticisms is that it's about more than COVID relief. Well, it is. It's also about stimulating the economy. We've got pent-up demand. We need some money to get out there and fuel. If we are indeed pulling out of the pandemic, then we need money to help fuel the growth. But see, part of the problem is that the Republicans throughout the Obama 8 years opposed things for no other reason than Obama supported it and that it was going to improve the economy. They did not want stimulus. They basically had a rule that they broke away from with Trump, in that if there was going to be any increased spending in one area, it had to be offset by decreases in another area. Well, eliminates Keynesian spending, because Keynesian spending is based on introducing money into the economy. So the Democrats this time around saying we're having none of that. We're having a $2 trillion bill here that is going to go, and we do not want museums to be closing down, because they haven't been able to make money all this time, theaters, and the like. So yes, they are among the people who will benefit. Republicans are saying special interests, but again, this is the mantra, and yet I do believe, and yes, it is popular. And the $1,400 checks are going to be popular. Biden's name is not going to be on it. So, remember, right. Trump wanted his name on it. I wish they could type on to the checks, no Republican voted for this check, but, that's not going to happen either. But they really need to get out and tell the story because, and that will lead into my prediction at the end of the show as to some things that are going to happen. History will repeat itself, but we'll talk about that later.
Well, to me, I'm interested in what that prediction is going to be. So we'll see. But to me, this is a prime example of how broken our political system is, because it seems to me that this is all about wins for one side and losses for the other side, yes. no matter which direction you look. And that gets to our zero sum, our winner take all kind of system that we have. It's all about wins and losses and who has power and who doesn't right now. It's not about what's good for you and me and all the other constituents out here. That's not what our politics is about anymore. And I believe that that's dangerous. That's not good. That's why, as you and I have talked about before, we need more viable parties. We need more voices in Washington, and not just these two voices, one from one party and one from the other, because that's why we're in this situation, because it's winner take all. So it's about W's and L's, and that's it. It's not about public policy and public administration and what's good for the people anymore. And that's why so many people are frustrated with our political system. They may not articulate it that way, but for people who follow this kind of thing, they're bookshelves full of people who have written about this situation and what some of the possible solutions are. But this is a prime example of it. It's about wins and losses and nothing else.
And it's about the next election cycle, because if the economy is going to benefit, and it could really start benefiting, by the way, I mean, we'll probably have to worry about inflation and measures taken to limit that pretty soon, because there is pent up demand waiting, right. Along with, there's going to be a lot of money for consumers to spend. So it will probably heat up the economy. Unemployment will probably drop down to 4%, if not below. And that will be the Democratic Party narrative. The Republicans want to oppose that, but it doesn't explain why the Republicans are trying to delay things.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to say, to get up in front and say, well, I oppose this bill, but the Americans do need help, so let's let it get out there as quickly as possible. They're trying to slow it down, and what does good do that do? That just means that people are going to receive their check days or if not weeks later. And one thing Biden has to do is he's got to get those checks out in a hurry. I mean, the money out in a hurry. It's got to be that he's going to sign this thing on Friday. I don't know why it takes 2 days after it's passed in both chambers to get to the president to sign, but it's going to be signed on Friday. He's got to have money getting into bank accounts by Monday.
Yeah, in fact, I heard, I believe it was last night, that if the bill passed today, which it did, Biden signs it this week. For people who have a direct deposit, who have filed online and so on, it could be in their accounts at some point next week. For sure. So that's good. It'll be another, month or so, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks for other folks, but still it's going to be.
Hopefully it's ready. It's got to go out fast.
Exactly. And it's interesting also to follow on what you're talking about there. I've heard a couple of economists over the last week or so talking about this bill. One of them was Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winner, as a matter of fact. And they are as confused as you are about the opposition to this bill, because I believe it was Krugman, but somebody check me on this, who was predicting that, if the bill passes, as it did, if the money gets into bank accounts soon, as it looks like it will, that pent-up demand that you were talking about, we could see an economic rebound beginning, late summer, certainly early fall, and that would be good timing for Democrats leading into the 2022 midterm elections. So you would think Republicans would be looking at that, because a lot of them are going to have to go home now going into 2022 and explain why they voted against it.
I'll tell you why they're voting against it at the end of the show. So anyways, in the meantime, you talked about two voices. We actually kind of have three right now, because we have these centrist Democrats who voted against the wage increase that Bernie put up. Bernie is going to push the wage increase. He's going to make sure it comes up for vote time after time. He's heading up the finance committee, so he can do that. Right. And he's going to want people on the record saying no time after time again. And he made sure it got to a roll call vote this time around. 7 Democrats voted against it. We knew Manchin was going to vote against it. Sinema, the 2 senators from Delaware. Delaware is like a corporate haven. John Tester in Montana. That's 5. I forget who the other 2 are, but they tend to be the centrist people in more purple, if not red, states that are in there. I figure, whatever, let them do what they have to do, except I just don't understand that particular stand. In West Virginia, we talked about this last week. There are so many people who would benefit from that. Yeah. But I just have to figure the chamber types and Club for Growth have got their influence on these guys, and they need the money to win races in elections. But what do you have to say? I mean, what is Manchin's game? What do you think?
Well, I think you're making a point that I've made on this show, and you have too before, and that is that we're in a situation where our elected officials in Washington represent their funders, not their constituents. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of our problem. Money in politics, Citizens United, super PACs. I mean, just go down the list. It's expensive to be in politics these days, but it can be lucrative if you stay in office long enough. You make a couple of headlines, you end up on the speaker circuit, you write a couple of books, you get a high-paying lobbyist job, you get health care for life and all that. So there are a lot of incentives financially to stay in office, and it's expensive to stay in office. So they are representing the people who fund the campaigns that keep them in office. They're folks like us who are just plain old constituents take a second seat there.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Manchin, because we have Sinema and the rest, but I want to really figure out, because Sinema, they can run a progressive in a primary, somebody along the lines of Mark Kelly, and win and have a chance of winning in the general. The fear is that if you primary Manchin and you somehow manage to win, that that person probably won't win in the general, because West Virginia these days, because of the coal, is about one of the reddest of the red states. I expected him to take stands against environmental moves, maybe even some social positions. I didn't expect him to take stands against the working class. Yeah. And so trying to figure him out, and he's on the defensive. He was all over the Sunday morning shows, and people are saying, "Are you basically a Republican light? Are you the majority leader at this point?" He's saying, "No, I'm a good guy. and I've got progressive views and the rest." So we're going to see. People are going to be watching him. He does not want to use the reconciliation for the infrastructure bill, which isn't even there yet, until they've exhausted all possibilities for some type of compromise with the Republicans. And maybe he sees some possibilities there. I don't know. But he also is not committed to vote for Becerra. That looks like it's going to. Becerra got out of the Finance Committee with a split vote, party way. And Manchin has said he hasn't made his mind up yet how to vote. They did vote for Merrick Garland. That was no problem. Looks like a couple of Republicans are going to vote for Deb Haaland, is it? Have I got her name right? Native American for the Secretary of Interior. Right. Becerra because he's pro, socialized medicine, universal health care, because he took so many stands against Trump as Attorney General. I think something like 30 to 40 lawsuits. They really don't want him there. They don't want him being promoted as anything. I'm careful what you ask for, because he could end up being a senator right with you. But Manchin has not made a commitment there. Manchin has said he does not want to eliminate the filibuster, and we'll talk about the filibuster in a minute, possibilities for reform. But what are your thoughts? What is how is he going to interact? What is his role going to be from here on in?
Well, there's a lot there. One of the most confusing things to me about that situation is that the Republican governor in West Virginia has supported some of these things, and Joe Manchin has still opposed them. The Republican senator has also supported some of these things, and again, he opposes it. So it's inexplicable to me, except, maybe if you ran down the list of his funders, you might get some ideas about why he's doing what he's doing. I don't know, but to me, he harkens back to Reagan Democrats, for the people who are old enough to remember Reagan Democrats, which I'll have something to say about in our predictions. So I'll kind of tease that a little bit too. But there's really no other way to explain it. He's a conservative Democrat, center-right Democrat. It makes you wonder why he stays in the Democratic Party.
Because he can't win the primary there.
On the Republican side, right? Yeah. He has an easier road, and there are situations like that on both sides across the country, where you find situations like this, where there's a politician who has an easier road one way or the other, that may not be founded on principle, but is expediency and ease of election. So that may be the only way to explain Joe Manchin at this point.
I don't know. I mean, it's just like I said, it's not the positions I expected him to take. I almost think he's just trying to make himself more relevant as well, but he's really pissing a lot of people off.
Yeah.
In the party, and they're putting pressure on him. The media, people were all over him. Cuomo, the reporter Cuomo was, so it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here. Maybe he could be a link to the bipartisanship. I mean, if there is going to be any, the Democrats couldn't mess around with this one. They could not come up with a weak tea coronavirus stimulus package. They needed this to be bold, and they needed it, and it was, and they needed it to be large. They needed to not be worrying about the price tag any more than the Republicans have worried about it for the past 4 years, and so they had to muscle this thing through. Does that mean the Republicans are going to just try to slow everything down? They're saying they will. They're going to, in the House, they're going to force votes, like Green today forced a vote on whether to adjourn. It slowed it down, made it move from the morning to the afternoon. And if they're going to do that, then there'll be debates late into the night, and and that's what's going to happen. But maybe Manchin, let's give him a benefit of the doubt possibility that he's got some kind of discussion going with Republicans, that maybe there can be more partisanship, that maybe the infrastructure bill could get 60 Republicans with certain compromise, and if they could, that would be better for politics in general. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get a lot of good information. I think this COVID bill, and I know we need to move on to another topic, but one last thing. I think the COVID bill gives us good information that the Republicans, no matter what, are going to be pretty much in lockstep. So the Democrats, why not go big? Go bold. You're not going to get any support for anything at all. Until we get to infrastructure, I say give it a shot. See if you can get some Republican support for some sort of infrastructure plan. We'll see. But I think for right now, we're seeing that the Republicans have no interest in bipartisanship, and I think there might not be any until 2022. But we'll see.
We'll see. All right. Well, but one thing Joe Manchin has brought up is he's not willing to nix the filibuster entirely. Mm-hmm. And that moves us to the next segment. And I'd like to take a time to watch a little bit of a clip from an old movie, Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Get up there with that lady that's up on top of this Capitol dome, that lady that stands for liberty. Take a look at this country through her eyes if you really want to see something. And you won't just see scenery. You'll see the whole parade of what man's carved out for himself after centuries of fighting. And fighting for something better than just jungle. So he can stand on his own 2 feet, free and decent, like he was created. No matter what his race, color, or creed. That's what you see. There's no place out there for graft, or greed, or lies, or compromise with human liberties. And if that's what the grown-ups have done with this world that was given to them, then we better get those boys' camps started fast and see what the kids can do.
So having watched that, that's how filibusters used to be done. That's right. Somebody had to stand up there. They couldn't stop talking. They couldn't yield time to anybody else. They had to do it themselves. I'm not sure I even need that. But Joe Manchin has said he wants to make the filibuster a little bit more painful. It's become too easy. Not only is the filibuster used to block a vote, it's used to block even debate. And you just get 40 people saying, no, we're not going to vote for it. And there it goes. And it's quietly, most Americans don't even know what happened. Now, the filibuster is one of those undemocratic things that was introduced historically to preserve slavery, along with the structure, the electoral college, the structure of the Senate. That was all to preserve slavery, but and other privileges, of the elite that they so felt entitled. But there is something to be said for an ability to not, for a minority to not be railroaded. And one of the things you do is if you've got something like what Jimmy Stewart is doing there, talking, and I would be fine if they could hand it off to others. If you've got 5 people doing it, they can hand it back and forth, because it would be 24/7 media coverage of it. It would start a national discussion. And if they did it every time, American people would get tired of it, but American people might say, they've got a point there. The media would do all its polling and, would say, yeah, maybe the majority is pushing it too hard. Maybe there needs to be, a discussion about that. If they have to earn it the old-fashioned way and not necessarily, in the Mr. Smith way, that was ridiculous. Just as it was ridiculous, I'm forgetting the name of the woman a few years ago who did the filibuster for the abortion rights in Texas. Really brave woman. She had to do it herself, and they were trying to shut her down. Wendy Davis, thank you. It shouldn't have to be that hard, but it shouldn't be easy either. I would say you would need to have at least, I would say 40 people supporting you, but then it doesn't stop. You've got to keep the debate going, and keep speaking, and maybe even be allowed to yield time to the opposition, so there can be some debate, rather than it just being an endurance test, because an endurance test doesn't prove anything. I think there's a possibility here, and Manchin says he would support something like that.
Sure. Yeah, and I would support that too. When you're talking about changes in procedure, when you're talking about changes in rules, whether it's in Congress or whether it's in a state legislature, and I was working in an office in a state legislative area when something like this did come up once. You always have to remember, be careful what you wish for, because your side will not always be in the majority. Right. So any kind of procedural change, any kind of rule change might look good in the short term, but it could come back to bite you at some point. So While I would love to see the filibuster go away right now, because my team, right, is has the sway right now. That's not always going to be the case, as we know and as we have seen over time. So I would absolutely support some of the things that you're talking about. Make them actually stand there like Jimmy Stewart and make their point and make them go for as long as they can. Make it painful so that it doesn't happen every single time.
Right.
But don't get rid of it, because there could come a time when it's going to benefit you. So, I think it was a bad idea to just allow people to filibuster just by saying, I object, and then they don't have to do anything. That's way too easy. And that's not even what the whole thing is supposed to be about.
Right.
So I would say, make them stand there for as long as they can and make their point. That's great. You're right. It would get a lot of coverage. It would be on C-SPAN 24/7, and it forced people to talk about it.
And it would, and if they did it too often, people would just get tired of it. They're saying you're being stupid, right? So they would have to be really selective about when they used it, because it's something that should be a last resort for something that's you feel so strongly about that, that they're veering off so far away from public opinion about something that then you use it. That's what it, should be for. I actually, think that there's democratic aspects to that, because sometimes the majority in the Senate and the House could be, must lead something through. I'd like to see it for the military budget. I'd like to see, Bernie Sanders up there filibustering the military budget. They don't allow it for budget stuff, right? We need to have that discussion. How high does the military budget need to be? Is it based on what we actually need for security, or is it because everybody's got military industrial factories in their districts and they want those jobs to keep going?
Right. Yeah. The way I look at it is that the filibuster puts obstruction on display. Now, having said that, sometimes that obstruction might be good as far as somebody is concerned. On the other hand, it might look like somebody's just playing political games. But put the obstruction on display and let the constituents, the voters, decide whether this is good or bad. And that's what it forces. It forces the obstruction into the sunlight so people can decide whether they support it or not. And that's a good thing.
It's absolutely a good thing. All right. I mean, like I said, and maybe Mankin could be a positive vehicle for that discussion. He's already saying, make them stand up. So, if that makes him look independent and like a deal broker, and that's the role he wants to play, then that's fine. We had to, get this COVID thing through. There might be a few other things that we need to kind of muscle through, but great, more power to him if that's what he does. Well, we should talk, of course, about something that is national politics. It's state politics, New York state politics, but it's been in the news. Cuomo, who was so popular months ago, who was even being thought of as a dark horse coming at the last minute, rescuer for the Democrats to run for president. Looks like he's struggling. He now has 6 women accusing him. And this was what a lot of people said about why they weren't buying into the accusations against Joe Biden. We talked a lot about that. Not only does it turn out that it couldn't have happened where she said it happened in an alcove that didn't exist in a tunnel that wasn't dark, but there was only one. And a lot of times when these things happen, somebody comes out, and then another woman is emboldened, and then another one. It only happened with one. 3 women came out against Clarence Thomas. There was another woman in Kavanaugh, but they didn't even let her get to the podium. Nobody, followed up on in Biden, but Cuomo, one after another. There have been now 6 women. You're starting to get up into Trump territory there. So I mean, Trump is at about 25, still way ahead, but it's God knows who isn't saying anything, but Cuomo seems to, by all accounts, seems to be a bully. Seems to have tried to hide, inconvenient facts about the coronavirus when he made some missteps. If he didn't try to hide it, maybe it would have been forgiven, but, maybe he made some bad decisions there and then tried to cover them up, or at least his staff did. And he's under a lot of pressure. Democrats are already calling for his resignation. I think 6 Democrats in the legislature. Mayor de Blasio, who probably wants to be governor himself, has been unapologetically against him. Kirsten Gillibrand, who pretty much was responsible for drumming Al Franken out. Now, granted, Al Franken had like 9 or 10 accusers as well, but for much less serious transgression compared to some of these other things. And she drummed him out. I think she took some political hits, so maybe she's a little gun shy right now. Or is she hypocritical because this is in her backyard? Easier to attack a liberal guy from Minnesota than the governor of her own state. I don't know. We'll see what she says. Apparently, there's going to be some type of independent investigation. I don't know the details of that. And maybe everybody should wait and see what that says before making any decisions about where they're going to fall. But what do you have to say?
Well, a couple of things. One, accusations like this should be taken seriously. The women who are making the accusations need to be heard. That's the first thing.
Right.
Secondly, though, everybody who is accused deserves due process. So whatever the investigation is going to be, it needs to be thorough, it needs to be independent, and whatever the results are need to be made public. And if it turns out that the accusations are true, then the people of New York can make a decision. Certainly, if they are true, he should not be in public office. But if it turns out they're not, then, you don't want somebody accused wrongly. But the accusations need to be taken seriously. The women need to be heard, and then due process should take its course and let the chips fall where they may.
Now, he's already started to make a little bit of the mistake Franken did. Franken just kept talking. He needed to stop talking.
Yeah.
He needed to say, I will wait for the ethics committee, investigation report, and then we'll talk then. That's what Cuomo should be doing. But Cuomo's like saying, making half apology, saying, I'm sorry if people misinterpreted what he said. So he's admitted part of it, but sort of implying that the women must be hypersensitive or just cognitively incapable of understanding whatever it was he was trying to communicate. Big mistake on his part there. This is what I always would always tell men in these situations, or anybody in these situations, is shut up. Don't apologize for anything. Don't explain anything. Don't attack your accusers or anything. Just say, I want an independent investigation. And this is whether you're guilty or not. I want an independent investigation. I will cooperate fully with that investigation. I will wait for the for the report from that investigation before I comment further. No further comment. And then that's it until that's done. That's how it should be done, no matter what. Guilty or not guilty, that should be the playbook. When they start doing it, these other things, it starts to tell me, well, God, at the minimum, they've got an ego problem here because they can't, they're doing this, or bad judgment or whatever. And they're not going to talk their way out of this. So he cannot talk his way out of accusations from 6 women. The only way he can do it is for them to investigate fully, interview these women. The women, as you say, should be heard, and the results made public. And that's what ought to happen. And if it turns out he's harassed 6 or more women, if it turns out they should probably do all the investigation at once, that he or his staff under him suppressed information or misrepresented facts in order to make him look better in the COVID or to cover up for mistakes, any of that, then I would say if the allegations are true, he should resign. But that we do need the procedure. We do need the process.
Yeah, and remember the statistics about COVID in the state of New York that you just referenced there. It was just not quite a year ago, last spring and early last summer, that things were looking pretty good in the state of New York. And there were people talking about Andrew Cuomo entering the presidential race, remember?
Yeah.
And because, people at that time, well, we don't know if Biden can win. Maybe he's too old. Maybe he's not going to appeal to enough voters to win. But Andrew Cuomo, look what a good job he's doing with the pandemic in New York. Maybe he'll jump into the race. And that was based on the numbers that were coming out of the state of New York at that time, which is what is in question right now.
How the mighty have fallen.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. So things can change quickly. And I agree. If it turns out that the accusations have a basis in fact, then he should not be in office. Whether he resigns or whether he's removed, I don't know. But certainly he should not be in public office if the accusations are true.
I mean, one of the things people are saying is, who does he think he is? Trump? Trump can get away with it because he's got a party that's going to back him up and doesn't even want to address these types of things. Cuomo, I think he's going to be in a little bit of a tougher position. Clinton got away with it, but then what did he get away with? He got away with lying about the sex, right? Everything was consensual, except for there were some other allegations, but we never got a full report on that. But that's different. Having an affair is different. That's up to the voters to decide. But I think Cuomo is maybe there's a little bit of that New York City male thing going on there. I don't know, but he's not Donald Trump. He's not in the Republican Party. He should shut up and wait for the process to play out.
Yeah, but it is true. You mentioned Mayor de Blasio earlier. It is true that Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo have been fighting each other for a long time, and there's no love lost there. So I'm sure de Blasio sees this as an opportunity for himself. And there could be others in the state of New York who haven't spoken up about this yet, who may be watching it very closely for some of the same reasons that de Blasio is politically. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. I think at the bottom line is we need to wait for the investigation, see what happens, and take the investigation seriously and see what the results are.
All right. Well, let's move again across the country. We're seeing, I think we're almost to 300 bills now intended to suppress the vote. The Republicans in many states are very upset with the results of these elections, particularly in Georgia. In Georgia, they've already got bills that have passed, expected to be signed by Kemp, because Kemp is one of those politicians who, despite the fact that his life was endangered by Donald Trump, seems to be turning around and saying he'd vote for Trump in 2024 if he was the nominee. So I'm not going to count on him to veto the things. But we've got bills in Iowa. Mm-hmm. We've got bills in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Florida. Florida, they want to get rid of drop boxes altogether. And these bills are basically limiting the mail vote, requiring some type of ID for voting by mail. Not even sure how that would work. Voter ID laws that they've been pushing for years, even though they accomplish almost nothing in terms of reducing fraud. They want to they intend to shorten the time for the early voting. They want to eliminate the Sunday early voting because that's when a lot of the black churches were getting their people out to vote. It's a big day for them. They get big turnouts from that. Right. I mean, it is, and it's just, they're just unapologetic. I mean, Senator Graham said, we'll never win again if we don't lower the number of people voting. To them, the fact that so many people voted was, a bad idea. Now we've got the Dominion voting machines. They've sued. I'm not seeing any. It's very interesting because that was the big claim, was that these voting machines were being switches were being flipped in China or Venezuela or whatever, and the votes were going to them, that fake ballots were being brought in. Maybe it's because of the lawsuits. The Pillow guy got sued a couple of weeks ago. On that, Smartmatic and Dominion are both suing. Probably other companies going to sue too. So they're not passing anything about that. That was the big claim, the biggest claim, the suitcases full of ballots and the rest. But what they are going to do is reduce the time that you can vote, make it harder to vote, and some people, including Stacey Abrams, are saying this is just a revival of Jim Crow. The Republicans are saying, well, it's not about that. It's about safety. It affects everybody the same way. If there's disproportionate effect, that's not intended. So, don't be accusing us of racism. It's just, we want secure votes. Almost exactly what was said to defend the Jim Crow laws, the poll taxes, and all of those things. But this is the Republican answer to having lost all three, the presidency in both chambers of Congress.
Yeah, you know what? Allowing people to vote affects everybody the same way too, in that it allows for full participation, which is what this country is supposed to be about. I think the other thing that this points out in a big way is the importance of state and local elections, because it was however many decades ago, the Republicans got busy trying to control the governor's mansion and the state legislature in each of the states as much as they possibly could.
Yes.
And that's why you see all of these bills having a chance in state after state after state, because the Republicans control the state legislative branches in most of the states now. So that's why they can do this. I believe at last check, there were 43 states that had introduced some bill or another to some degree regarding voter suppression. This also points out the importance of H.R. 1, which is in Congress right now. Probably won't pass the Senate, but it addresses a lot of the things that you just ticked off on that long list. And it also seeks to take some of the money out of politics and reform some of the ethics regulations in politics, and allow for an ease of voting. And boy, do we need that more than ever right now. And it's interesting that these two things clash at about the same time, where you have the states trying to suppress the votes and Democrats in Congress trying to expand the vote. So it's going to be H.R. 1 in Congress versus all of these state legislative initiatives. And we'll see what happens. Of course, we know that federal law trumps state law. So I think what we're going to end up with is something in the Supreme Court that is controlled by the conservatives right now.
Right. I mean, the Supreme Court already gutted the Voting Rights Act, so exactly. H.R. 1 is an attempt to kind of revive some of it, and actually, there isn't federal supremacy in with regard to elections unless the 14th and 15th Amendments are being violated, equal protection and the right of everyone to vote.
Don't you think they are in some of these bills?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's, and quite frankly, it ought to be that if you prove disproportionate impact, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. Yeah. You need to find an alternative that is less impactful for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But,
right. And there's no basis in there's no evidence of the kind of voter fraud that they're using in some states as the excuse for doing all this. So they have no evidence to produce. And it's very clear. It's just very clear what's going on. And, it's completely against what this country is supposed to be about, right? One person, one vote. That's what we're about. The Republicans are trying to reverse that. And, I think that they will have success in some of the states, and we'll see what happens as a result of that.
And what's going to take is a Stacey Abrams type reaction where they've got to retake that. Even with the gerrymandering, they got to come up with the votes to retake those state bodies
And I think that reaction is going to happen soon. I think the stronger the Republicans make their push for voter suppression, the more pushback they're going to get, the more backlash they're going to get, the more on people's minds this is going to be. And there's going to be some anger about this, and it's going to motivate people on the left more than ever. And so, we're headed for some sort of political clash with regard to voter suppression, and it's going to be loud when it happens.
It is. And, like I said, the Voting Rights Act, has been gutted. States that were on special watches are no longer have to report, the way they had. And so now they're just free to do this stuff. And for whatever reason, gerrymandering was never considered an abandonment. HR 1 does address some of that. Right. But it could be struck down as an overreach by the Supreme Court.
Well, the clause in HR 1 that addresses that has to do with nonpartisan redistricting. Mm-hmm. In other words, creating a commission that would be independent of the political parties and the state legislature in a state, and they do the redistricting. That whether that will work, it has been tried in some places and does seem to work in some places if it's done well, but that's how HR 1 addresses it. I don't know if that's enough, but you're right, it is in there.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about there's a couple of other topics. We're running out of time here. One topic was, we've so far had only one reported military action, and that's the bombing in Syria. Apparently, there were some mortars being shot at them, and they shot back. But there is a push to basically pull back the War Powers Act, and Biden has said that he would sign it. So far, we haven't heard of any additional bombings in Yemen. Biden says he wants to nix all of that. And we really do need to start, we may really get to a point where we start thinking in terms of we've given the executive too much power here. I don't know if the power was abused for that bombing raid in Syria. I do know that Biden had promised a little bit of a briefing of it, but they haven't been completely candid. There may be good reasons for that, but there needs to be at least an explanation as to why they haven't shown up to explain why that was. And these bombings went on all the time under not just Trump but Obama. Particularly in Yemen, and when it just was constant, and we'd hear about civilians being killed and wonder if they even got the right targets and the rest. We need to there needs to be accountability for every military action, no matter how minor, and there needs to be public accountability about it except to the degree that maybe security would be violated. But we need to stop thinking about this as normal. And it does look like in both parties, but you got the Republicans because they're Republicans and it was a Democrat doing it, and Democrats who for a long time have wanted to pull back the War Powers Act and have Congress reclaim some of its quote unquote war making power. That we may actually see some pretty interesting legislation here, and that may even be bipartisan.
Well, I hope so. I've long thought that the executive power was extended too much. That worries me a lot. Too much executive power to me begins to chip away at checks and balances. And I don't even remember having any executive orders Trump issued. I lost count. And of course, what was it on day one? Biden issued 17 or something like that on day one. So. I understand the executive, if the executive is able to do that, doing it, but that doesn't make it right. So I'm more about checks and balances and not trusting one person at the top. Right. So I don't like the overreach of executive power. So and certainly when it comes to sending our kids into war, or harming other people around the world. So. Yeah, I hope that we reel that in somehow at some point. I don't know, it's hard to gauge the appetite on both sides for that. But I think you're right. That is something that might get some bipartisan support. Again, on the other hand, it might be one of those things where both parties are a little reluctant because they know that they're not always going to hold the White House. So how does that play out? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, we don't even declare war anymore, right? I mean, we just go in and the fighting goes on and on and on. We hear some of it. We don't hear other things about it. And by not declaring war, that's Congress not taking,
Right.
we had this idea that if you're going to be in there for more than 30 days, then there has to be a declaration of war or we have to pull out. And of course, you don't want to have rigid rules like that because there might be circumstances where, which make that problematic. But I'm sorry, this is, we're the only country that gets into these things for so long.
Yeah.
And we, it was, I mean, for all the people, conservatives who talk about, we want to do what the founding fathers envisioned. The founding fathers are really clear on one thing. They gave the war-making power to Congress. The president is supposed to, manage the war and command over the war, but not to start it. I mean, that is too much power, and we really need to focus. So anyway.
Was World War II the last declared war?
Well, there was something, we did pass an Iraq War resolution, I think.
Okay.
That was it. But other than that, it's all been police actions.
Police actions or conflicts.
Right, rescue missions, whatever. All right. Well, we are at the time of the show where we are going to pull out our crystal balls and come up with some predictions. There's a lot in flux here, but Chuck, what do you got?
Well, one goes back to what we were talking about at the very top of the show, exactly how a lot of this is going to shake out politically in Washington. I've been thinking lately that there might be a possibility, whether it's infrastructure or executive power, as we were discussing, whatever it might be. But I think that there's a possibility in the next couple of years before the midterms that we might see a group in Washington that we might refer to as Biden Republicans, the same way we referred to, decades ago, to Democrats in Washington who were Reagan Democrats. We may see some Biden Republicans because some of the things that need to get done right now will benefit everybody, regardless of political party. And I believe that heading into 2022 and certainly into 24, there's going to be some pressure just to get some things done. So I predict that there are going to be some Biden Republicans. I don't know how many. And, there's a long list of who they might be now and then, but there's going to be some of those. Secondly, I think at some point soon, we're going to just decide, this is on my mind because of what's about to happen this weekend. We're just going to decide to pick either daylight saving time or standard time and just go with it and stop moving the clocks. So please.
I actually don't mind the clocks moving. I kind of like
Really?
it, but I don't know. I was raised with it, so it's not such a big deal. I always kind of I liked it in the fall because I get more time, an extra hour in the spring. I like it because we have more daylight and the rest.
But not everybody even participates in it, and that creates problems.
I know, and death rates do go up. All right. I just have one prediction, and this prediction is based on what happened in 2009. They have no shame. The reason the Republicans are going to vote no on this is because they're going to take credit for it anyway. They're going to go home and they're going to brag about all the good things that they brought to their districts. They're going to say, "Look at the check you got. That's what we brought you." And people fall for it. They did in 2009. They do it every time. Even when they oppose something, they shamelessly go and plug it as something that they accomplished, or that even if they voted against it, they somehow wheeled and dealed and managed to get it into the bill anyway. And it's a game. And I'm going to look for clips of Republican politicians doing that to show on a future show, because it is one of the most shameless and cynical acts, and unfortunately, their voters very often let them get away with it.
You used the word I was going to use, cynical. It speaks to the fact that there are a lot of voters out there who are just uninformed and don't keep up with it or don't care, and are just putting all their energy in the us versus them. Wins and losses, does it really matter?
All right. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Matt. We will be back next week. We'll probably be talking about more appointments. We'll see what happens with the Becerra appointment. Merrick Garland got through on a bipartisan notion today. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll also see what's going on with the investigation of the insurrection, which is starting to heat up. Until then, we'll see you next time.